of Maryville Academy, and I am delighted tonight to bring our guest, Mark Ishaug, who is going to be speaking to us about the tremendous work that he and his colleagues do at Thresholds. So, Mark, first, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'd like to invite you first to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Well, thank you, sister. It's great to be here, and good evening, everyone. I'm just going to say hi to the audience, and then I'm going to turn right to sister to have a conversation. So, Mark Ishaug, CEO of Thresholds, a pretty large community mental health and housing organization. We are celebrating our 65th anniversary this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. 65 years of bringing, as we say, home, health, and hope to those with pretty serious mental health and substance use challenges. And we've been so focused for the last 65 years to help serve the most marginalized in our community, people who would otherwise be in institution of homelessness, jail and prisons, the institution of nursing homes. And we work every day pretty diligently to keep people out of institutional settings and in the community of their choice.
So, outstanding mission. We're going to come back to it in just a minute, but how did you end up at Thresholds?
How did I end up at Thresholds?
Let's tell our viewers first who you are.
Okay. Mark Ishaug, CEO of Thresholds, but I'm probably a lot more than that, right? But I was blessed 12 years ago. I was recruited to Thresholds, having spent a little more than 2 decades in the fight against HIV and AIDS in Chicago. I served as the CEO of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago and 1 year in Washington at a company called AIDS United, which was an advocacy and funding and community development organization focused on ending HIV and AIDS. And before that, I was actually spent a lot of time in Africa. So I had a whole different career path.
Where were you there?
What's that?
Where were you in Africa?
In Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique.
Okay, so now we're learning a lot about our leader here and what prepared him for this work. Huh?
Yeah. I think I've always had a social justice calling. From the time I was a really young kid. I grew up on the southwest side of Chicago in a place called Marquette Park, which is very famous or infamous for a whole lot of reasons. Martin Luther King Jr. marched through Marquette Park and was battered and abused by the residents there when all he was doing was trying to draw attention to unfair housing practices, redlining and contract buying and everything that was destroying the heart of our city and that was based in really racist tenets. And my mom became really involved in the fight against redlining. And so as a young kid, I was going to these rallies with her. And so I think it sort of started there. And then at Notre Dame, where I did my undergraduate degree, right after I graduated, I served as a Holy Cross Associate, which is like the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, Avodah, the Jewish Volunteer Corps. And I spent a year in Colorado working at the Pikes Peak Justice and Peace Commission. So I think that my time in Africa, my time at the AIDS Foundation led me to Thresholds.
So you come to Thresholds, did you say 12 years ago?
12 years ago.
All right.
Yep.
Welcome. And you come in the door, and what do you find?
I found the most fabulous organization I could have ever imagined. I think at the time there were about 600 employees.
Wow.
Providing case management and psychiatric services, housing, of course, and homeless outreach, a high school for young adults with mental illness, a young moms program for those with deaf and hard of hearing. And I was just like, wow, this is really amazing. That it's both a service organization and a justice organization. And I knew right then when I walked in the door that it was going to be a very special place. And we've grown tremendously in the last 12 years now. And we have about 1,300 employees in 5 counties. So we more than doubled the size of the organization and doubled the budget and all of that, all to meet the need. It's not about being bigger in size. It's not about being bigger in budget. It's about being bigger to meet the needs of those that need us the most.
Isn't that true?
It's been a great, I'm using that in the past tense. It is a great ride. And I love that I get to work with the most compassionate, passionate, hardworking people that care so much about those that have the least.
So what are the 5 counties?
So Chicago and all of Cook County. We're in DuPage County, McHenry County, and Kankakee County.
Okay.
And one of the really exciting things that we're doing, Sister, is there's a new movement in the mental health space, and it's called Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics. Now, I know that's a mouthful, CCBHC, but it's a way to create new programs and create new sustainable sources of support for community mental health. And so in the last couple of years, Thresholds was awarded 4 grants from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, to create 4 what are called Threshold Centers for Mental Well-Being in McHenry County, McHenry, Kankakee, the north side of Chicago, and our newest on the south side of Chicago at 47th and Halsted. So really exciting time. And what I say is that while we focused initially at Thresholds on serving those with serious and persistent mental illness and the most challenged with psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia and bipolar disease and major depression, we're extending our services now to a broader community, as I say, from twinkle to wrinkle. So for very young kids and their families to people that are much older but don't have a serious mental illness but still need the kind of services, counseling, psychotherapy, substance abuse treatment groups that we're going to be able to offer. So it's a very, very exciting time.
So, Mark, I'm going to promise our audience that we will come to some of the other services you have at Thresholds, but let's dig in a little bit more to the mental health.
Yep.
First, what do you find to be the attitude of people to accept help or seek help for mental health services?
Well, that's such a great question, Sister. And we have come so far in the last 12 years since I've been at Thresholds. There is, but at least 12 years ago, the stigma
Yes.
was tremendous. And because of societal stigma and discrimination, a lot of people did not want to admit that they needed help. And they couldn't admit it when somebody in their family needed help because there was shame. There's some idea that mental and emotional well-being or what's going on in your head is not also physical. So, but it's a history in the United States and probably all over the world where there's been this huge separation of the head from the body. I mean, makes no sense, but that's how it was. And the medical professions and human service profession, I mean, we just really divided the head from the rest of the body. But there's been so much work over the last 12 years, and places like the Kennedy Forum, Illinois, which is was started by Patrick Kennedy and Peter O'Brien here locally, the NAMIs, Mental Health America, so many organizations that have done such a great job of fighting stigma and discrimination, because it's actually more than stigma. And I think, but one of the reasons why we've made so much progress in the last 12 years is that young people especially refuse to be stigmatized. Young people say, I have a mental health challenge, or I am anxious, or I am depressed, and it's not okay. And it's not okay that I'm not okay. And that has made such a huge difference. And I just have such tremendous respect for young people. I'm a boomer. So, I have a couple generations that are working with me, from Gen X to Gen Z to Millennial, and there's a new generation coming. I don't even know what it's called. But I'm so grateful for the young people that have just raised the bar here when it comes to acknowledging the importance of mental health.
So besides stigma, Mark, what do you find are other barriers for people to receive services for mental health issues?
Yeah, well, I just think there's been such inequity in funding, inequity in insurance coverage. Such a great question that you're asking today. I mean, just last week, the Illinois House of Representatives passed a bill that, if it passes the Senate and is signed by the governor, will really transform the way commercial insurance covers mental health services. Really, in terms of payment, in terms of providers that are part of these insurance panels. But for so long, there's been this different and unequal system of healthcare and mental health care. In the space that I mostly work, which is in the Medicaid space, until recently, the Medicaid rates for the work that we do were so woefully underfunded that we could not attract or retain the staff that we needed to do this work. And I mentioned CCBHC, these certified behavioral health clinics. For years, there's been these great physical health entities called FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, which are fantastic. And there's so many great FQHCs in Chicago and all over the country. But they have funding that community mental health services and organizations have not had access to. They have enhanced rates for the work and for psychiatry and for medical care. So frankly, the mental health sector has been the stepchild. That's such not a nice, probably right word, but you know what I'm trying to say. We've been second fiddle to the healthcare system, and we are committed at Threshold to providing leadership, including in the advocacy space, to change this story.
So if someone has a need for services and contacts Thresholds, what will they find for mental health services?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways to access our services, and we work closely with hospitals and hospital discharge planners. We work directly with families that are making referrals into our system. That's one way to get in. We have a mobile crisis response team that serves the north side of Chicago. There are other mobile crisis response teams. There's the 988 system that you are familiar with. And the 988 system is the new national hotline, if you will, so that people with any kind of mental health challenge are able to call this number and be directed to care. So, one of the challenges a place like Thresholds has is the ability to serve everyone that calls and everyone that is in need. Our intake department, which is a mighty group of people, could be busy 24/7 in assessing, whether or not somebody is right for Threshold services. And if they're not, we try to link them someplace else. So the big challenge that we all face on both the publicly funded side and on the commercial insurance side is that there's just not enough capacity in the system to serve everybody that needs it. So but we got to keep fighting for it.
Well, I'm sure that our viewers want to hear more about how in the world you do mobile services.
Yeah, well, we have
mental health.
Yeah, so our mobile crisis response team, based in Ravenswood, it's 24/7, 365, which means that we have 2 or 3 people on staff, 3 shifts all the time, every single day. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Passover, MLK Junior Day.
So a call comes in.
A call comes in.
What happens?
So our team, if the call comes to us, we can assess whether or not they need an in-person visit. Often they do. Many calls can be de-escalated over the phone. But usually if it's coming to us for mobile crisis response, it means because a 988 or another dispatcher has either gotten to us or the client has gotten to us. And we identify that they're in the catchment area that we are able to serve, and the team will go out and see them wherever they're at. If it's in their home, if it's at Starbucks, if they're out at a park. We have a philosophy at Thresholds that we just show up, and we show up where people are at, and that's where we go. So we do that particular service in what's called a dyad. So 2 people, including a person with lived experience of mental illness. In so many of our programs at Thresholds, we have people that are living with a mental health diagnosis, and our peers, as we call them, are instrumental to the success of so many of our programs, including mobile crisis response and our living room, which is something that I think you and the audience here would be particularly interested in. we're one of 2 living rooms in Chicago, again, open 24/7, 365, where anybody can come to the living room. This is on the north side of Chicago at 4423 North Ravenswood.
Okay.
And it's an alternative to hospitalization, or an alternative to the emergency room, where a crisis can be de-escalated, where somebody in a mental health crisis has a safe place to be. They can stay there for, in one part of the living room for up to 48 hours. So it's a place where you can get a hot drink, you can get a small meal, but most importantly, you are being wrapped around with love and kindness and compassion by social workers, therapists, and people with lived experience, who also have experienced crisis in their own lives, and so are really fantastic at building that bridge and giving people the tools and the compassion and support they need to hopefully leave our living room to go home, but always know that we are there if they need us.
So I'm going to say to our audience, we can already hear Mark talking about these wonderful services for persons who are dealing with mental health issues. And there would be more to say, but I'm going to move on, because if that's all Thresholds did, we would say what a wonderful resource in our community. However, Thresholds has many more services, and I want to make sure that we take some time. Mark?
Sure, I'd love to.
We can come back to mental health, but you have a particular contribution for persons who are homeless.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those services?
Yes, though it's all actually related to our very laser focus on mental illness and
Right.
substance abuse. So we are Chicago's largest permanent supportive housing provider for people who are experiencing homelessness. And almost all of them have a diagnosis of mental illness and a co-occurring substance abuse disorder. So I think we own about 700 or so units in greater Chicago, and then we manage another maybe total 12 or 1,300 units. So it's a big undertaking, but it all starts with housing.
Sure.
So I'm so glad that we're able to talk about housing. We have a mantra or a tagline at Thresholds: home, health, and hope. And I tell people all the time that it starts with home, that it's very difficult to achieve health and to achieve hope if you don't have a safe place to call home.
For sure.
So
true.
while we're big and we want to get bigger because the housing need is so great, there are 68,000 men, women, and children in Chicago that do not have a place to call home. Thousands.
Wow.
68,000. Yeah, this is a big number, folks. 68,000. Thousands of these folks are on the streets and encampments. Many are in temporary shelters. And then tens of thousands are doubled up in situations that are difficult, if not unsafe. And so one of the things, again, that we have to do, to me, it all comes back to advocacy. And not partisan advocacy. This is not about partisan politics. This is about us collectively as a community making sure that there are resources, public and private, to care for those that we care for. And housing continues, as you said, to be the number one unmet need. So Thresholds is just starting our next strategic plan for the next couple of years, 24 to 27, and housing will figure prominently again, because we have to be a contributor to bringing this number down from 68,000 to 0. And I hope that in our lifetime, we get to celebrate the end of homelessness in Chicago.
This would be a wonderful thing. So let's...
Other programs, though, you were interested in.
Housing. I'm going to keep on housing for a minute,
okay,
if I may.
Absolutely.
Because I'm thinking for our viewers, if you have a family member or yourselves are homeless, how would they reach out to you, Mark, and avail themselves of the services of Thresholds?
Yeah, so depending on where people live, there are various avenues to trying to find supportive housing. A big advocacy group in Chicago, the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless.
Right. Oh, sure.
There's a group called All Chicago, which provides funding and technical assistance to organizations like Thresholds. There's, of course, the 211, there's 988. So people that are experiencing housing insecurity should definitely avail themselves to these resources that are available. But we have to also be honest that housing is the biggest unmet need. And it breaks my heart every single day, as it does everybody that's doing this work, how few resources there are. You might have read or heard in the news this week that the Chicago City Council just passed, I think it was on Friday, maybe it was yesterday. So recently passed a multi $1.2 billion bond fund, which is going to sort of transform the way I think we're able to build affordable housing here in Chicago and economic development writ large. It's a transformation of the TIF, tax increment financing system that we've had in Chicago for a long time. So really excited about this, and I am looking forward to working with everybody in the city council and the mayor's office and developers and investors and advocates and philanthropy, and mostly people with lived experience of homelessness. Like, how can we all work together as a collective to make sure that we solve this problem? You know, housing or lack thereof is a political problem, and it requires a political response in, writ large. But it's also a moral crisis. Mm-hmm. And I feel, as someone who is so driven to do what's right and to do it right, we have to acknowledge that it is it's a moral imperative that we figure out a solution to what I feel is the crisis of our time.
For sure. So you've just, first of all, told us about a lot of housing that you manage at Thresholds.
Yeah.
And then you gave this huge number, 68,000 people who don't have housing. So are you saying that all of your housing is full already?
Our housing is full.
Wow.
And it's very, very hard. I mean, there are vacancies that appear periodically, but there are waiting lists, but there are so many folks in the public and the nonprofit and the for-profit sector that are working so hard to develop housing, what the CHA is doing, what the Department of Housing is doing, what the Suburban Alliance to End Homelessness is doing in all Chicago. So while I'm sad, I mean, there was a big effort a couple of weeks ago that called Bring Chicago Home, mm-hmm. that could have transformed how we fund housing and services for those experiencing homelessness. It didn't pass, but we just have to pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, acknowledge what worked and what didn't work, and co-create this solution together. So, but it's gonna take just so much energy and so much focus. But I know that we can do it.
Yeah.
Right?
No, but no question, we have to build capacity.
We have to build capacity.
It's not just a matter of walking down the street and saying to someone, "Oh, I have a place for you."
No, that does not currently exist. That's
Okay.
right.
Well, now we've heard just a taste of what Thresholds is doing about housing and homelessness, and we could stay on this topic, but we don't have time. So in 1 minute, can you just tell us a couple of the last thing you want to say about the other services you have, Mark?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's we have a program called the Narcotics Arrest Diversion Program, which I also love, which is based on the west side of Chicago in our shared space,
right.
On Parkside. And so I just have to say, being in partnership with you in this work is so exciting to me, and I feel, again, so blessed that we are colleagues in this good work.
We feel the same at Maryville.
Well, thank you. So it's really exciting that we have a program that can keep people out of jail, mm-hmm. People who are arrested for small amounts of controlled substances, instead of going to jail, can be referred to Thresholds or a partner's community substance abuse treatment program. I love that. We have DCFS programs for young people, including people transitioning from youth to adulthood, which is fantastic. I said we have a program for those that are deaf and hard of hearing, and we have an alternative school. So there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff that we're doing to bring people home, health, and hope.
Well, I think that we know that we should have Mark back for another program, but I want to thank Mark Ishaug for helping us to understand the many ways that Thresholds is making our community a better place for all of our sisters and brothers in Chicago and the Chicagoland area and 5 counties.
Yeah. Well,
That's-
and it's all about partnership. And so with you and the other great partners that we have, I think we can solve these big, hairy problems together. And with the audience of listeners to CAN TV, the people that care so deeply about Chicago and the communities that we serve, we know and we are counting on you because we can't do this alone, and we want to be a partner with you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, sister.
And thank you all for being with us this evening.